The Met Gala is one of those events that everyone talks about, whether they're into fashion or not. It's like the Oscars for clothes, where celebrities, designers, and influencers come together to show off their wildest, most creative outfits. Every year, the theme changes, and people try to outdo each other with their looks. This year, the theme was reimagining royalty, and it brought all kinds of interpretations, some elegant, some over the top, and some downright confusing. Among the sea of famous faces walking up the iconic steps of the Met, there was one woman who stood out, not because she was dripping in diamonds or wearing a gown worth millions, but because her outfit told a story. She wasn't someone you'd recognize immediately. She wasn't a Hollywood star or a socialite, but she carried herself with confidence, like she knew exactly why she belonged there. That woman was a designer, and her name would soon be on everyone's lips. Her dress was unlike anything anyone had seen before. At first glance, it looked chaotic, almost messy. The fabric seemed patchy, like pieces of old clothes stitched together without much thought. Some parts sparkled under the lights while others were dull, almost rough to the touch. People couldn't decide if it was art or just, well, junk. As cameras clicked and reporters shouted questions, the whispers began. "Is this a joke?" one person muttered. Another laughed, saying, "Looks like she raided a thrift store." Social media lit up within minutes. Memes started popping up everywhere. One post compared her dress to something you'd find at a garage sale. Another joked that maybe she ran out of time and threw the whole thing together last minute. Comment sections filled with harsh words, poking fun at her choice of attire. For many, it felt like an easy target, a chance to laugh at someone who didn't fit the mold of what a Met Gala guest should look like. But here's the thing. None of the critics bothered to ask why she wore what she did. They didn't stop to think about the hours or even years it might have taken to create something so unique. All they saw was surface-level weirdness, and they judged her based on that alone. Meanwhile, she walked through the crowd with grace, smiling politely as photographers snapped away. You could tell she heard the whispers, but she didn't let them shake her. She looked calm, almost serene, as if she knew something they didn't. What no one realized at the time was that her dress wasn't just a random mix of fabrics. It wasn't thrown together in a hurry or meant to shock people for the sake of shocking them. Every single piece of that gown had meaning. Those shimmering bits? They came from scraps of silk donated by local tailors. The rough patches? Pieces of canvas salvaged from old tents. Even the sparkling embellishments were repurposed jewelry, carefully sewn onto the fabric to catch the light just right. This wasn't just a dress, it was a statement about waste, creativity, and finding beauty in things others might throw away. She wanted to challenge the idea that luxury has to mean excess, that royalty can only come from shiny new things. Her dress was proof that you can take something discarded and turn it into something extraordinary. And yet, instead of getting praise for her vision, she faced ridicule. As the night went on, more and more people joined in on the mockery. Reporters asked loaded questions during interviews, trying to get a reaction out of her. "Why did you choose such an unconventional look?" one asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Others made snide remarks, questioning whether she really understood the theme. But she answered every question with patience and dignity. When someone called her dress garbage couture, she simply smiled and said, "Sometimes the best creations come from what others consider trash." Despite the negativity swirling around her, she stayed focused. She knew her work spoke, louder than any insult ever could. And deep down, she believed that someday people would see the truth behind her design. They would understand that she wasn't just making a dress, she was starting a conversation. A conversation about how we treat our planet, how we define beauty, and how we value innovation. Little did anyone know, that moment, the moment when she walked into the Met Gala and faced a wave of criticism, would mark the beginning of something much bigger, something that would force the entire fashion world to rethink its priorities. But for now, she was just another attendee, standing tall amidst a storm of judgment, waiting for the world to catch up, and catch up it would. Growing up, life wasn't easy for the woman who would later become a symbol of resilience and creativity. She was born and raised in a bustling neighborhood where dreams often got buried under the weight of everyday struggles. Her family didn't have much, money was tight, and luxuries were rare. But what they lacked in material wealth, they made up for in resourcefulness and heart. Her mother worked long hours as a seamstress, stitching clothes for people in the community. She had a small sewing machine tucked into the corner of their tiny living room, surrounded by piles of fabric scraps. These weren't just leftovers, they were treasures waiting to be transformed. The young girl watched her mother turn those discarded pieces into beautiful outfits, piecing them together with care and precision. It was like magic, the way something old could become something new, something alive with color and purpose. From an early age, she learned the value of making do with what you had. Her mother taught her how to thread a needle, cut patterns, and sew straight lines. At first, it was just a fun activity, a way to bond after school. But as she grew older, she began to see it as more than that. It was a lesson in sustainability, before anyone even used that word. It was about respecting materials, giving them a second chance instead of tossing them aside. And most importantly, it was about telling stories through creation. By the time she reached her teenage years, she was already designing her own clothes. She'd scour thrift stores for forgotten gems, old dresses, mismatched scarves, anything with potential, and bring them back to life. Friends started noticing her unique style and asked her to make things for them too. What started as a hobby soon turned into a passion and eventually, a dream. But chasing that dream wasn't easy. When she decided to study fashion design, many people doubted her. Some told her she was wasting her time, that the industry wouldn't accept someone like her. Others said her ideas were too out there, too unconventional for mainstream appeal. They warned her that fashion was all about glamour and prestige, not about saving scraps or thinking about the environment. Still, she refused to give up. She enrolled in a local community college, determined to learn everything she could about design. Classes were tough, especially since she had to balance schoolwork with part-time jobs to help support her family. Late nights became her norm, spent sketching designs or practicing stitches under dim lighting. There were moments when self-doubt crept in, when the rejections felt heavier than her hopes. Yet every time she thought about quitting, she remembered her mother's hands moving steadily over the sewing machine, creating beauty out of nothing. That memory kept her going. After graduation, she opened a small boutique in her neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, just a little shop with racks of handmade clothes and a sign that read, "One-of-a-kind creations." Each piece was crafted with love, using materials sourced sustainably. Word spread quickly among locals, and soon, her boutique became a favorite spot for people looking for something different. Customers loved the stories behind her designs, how a vintage scarf became a statement sleeve, or how leftover denim scraps formed intricate embroidery patterns. Despite the growing popularity of her work, breaking into the larger fashion world proved difficult. Industry insiders dismissed her creations as too niche or not marketable enough. Rejection letters piled up, each one stinging a little more than the last. One designer even told her flat out that no one cared about sustainability. They cared about luxury, about exclusivity. Those words stuck with her, not because they broke her spirit, but because they fueled her determination to prove them wrong. She knew she couldn't compete with big brands on their terms, so she decided to play by her own rules. Instead of trying to fit into the mold, she embraced what made her stand out. She started documenting her process online, sharing videos of how she transformed discarded fabrics into stunning garments. People responded positively, drawn to her authenticity and message. Slowly but surely, her following grew, and with it, her confidence. When the invitation to attend the Met Gala arrived, it came as both a shock and a validation. For years, she'd been told she didn't belong in high fashion. Now, here was proof that maybe, just maybe, the world was ready to listen. She poured her heart into designing the perfect gown for the occasion, a piece that would honor her roots, showcase her skills, and challenge the very definition of royalty. As she worked on the dress, She thought about all the times she'd been underestimated, all the doors that had slammed shut in her face. This wasn't just about attending a glamorous event. It was about proving that innovation and inclusivity could coexist with tradition. It was about showing the world that true artistry comes from the soul, not from a price tag. And so, when she stepped onto the red carpet that night, wearing a gown stitched together from fragments of the past, she wasn't just representing herself. She was representing everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, rich enough, or polished enough to succeed. She carried their stories with her, woven into every seam and stitch of her dress. Little did she know, the journey ahead would test her resolve in ways she couldn't imagine. But deep down, she believed in the power of her message. Because if there was one thing she'd learned from her mother, it was this. Even the smallest scraps, when given love and attention, can shine brighter than gold. The backlash hit hard and fast like a storm rolling in without warning. As soon as she stepped onto the red carpet, the whispers began. At first, they were quiet, just murmurs rippling through the crowd, but within minutes, they grew louder, sharper, more biting. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every angle of her gown, but not out of admiration. Reporters leaned in close, their questions laced with thinly veiled mockery. "What inspired this unique look?" one asked, raising an eyebrow. Another chimed in, "Did you run out of fabric?" Social media exploded almost instantly. Memes flooded timelines, turning her painstakingly crafted gown into a punchline. Someone photoshopped her dress to look like a pile of rags. Another compared it to something you'd find at a garage sale. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds, with people piling on criticism while others tried and failed to defend her. The phrase "garbage couture" trended for hours, accompanied by endless jokes about how she must have stitched the whole thing together in a hurry. It wasn't just strangers online who joined in. Even some of the other attendees whispered cruel remarks behind their hands, laughing quietly as if they were sharing a secret joke. One influencer posted a video zooming in on parts of her dress, pointing out what they called flaws. They mocked the uneven textures, the mismatched patterns, and the rough edges, completely missing or ignoring the craftsmanship behind it all. For anyone else, this kind of public humiliation might have been unbearable. But she stood tall, holding her head high despite the chaos swirling around her. She answered every question with calmness, explaining that her gown was made entirely from upcycled materials, scraps of fabric, discarded jewelry, and leftover textiles. She spoke passionately about sustainability, about rethinking waste, and about finding beauty in unexpected places. Yet her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Most people weren't listening. They were too busy laughing. But amid the noise, there were faint glimmers of support. A few influencers pushed back against the ridicule, posting thoughtful responses that highlighted the genius behind her design. One fashion blogger wrote a lengthy thread breaking down the intricate details of her gown, pointing out how each piece told a story. Another activist praised her commitment to environmental responsibility, reminding everyone that fashion had a massive carbon footprint and needed innovators willing to challenge the status quo. Even so, these voices felt like drops of water in an ocean of negativity. For every person defending her, dozens more piled on the insults. Some accused her of seeking attention, saying she deliberately wore something outrageous to get noticed. Others dismissed her message altogether, claiming sustainability didn't belong at an event as glamorous as the Met Gala. It seemed like no matter how hard she tried to explain herself, the world wasn't ready to hear her. Despite the overwhelming criticism, she refused to let it break her. Instead, she leaned into the moment, using interviews as opportunities to share her vision. When reporters asked leading questions, she answered honestly, never backing down. "This isn't just a dress," she said during one interview. "It's a reminder that we can create something beautiful without wasting resources. It's about respecting the planet and the people who live on it." Her responses caught the attention of a few key figures in the industry. A well-known designer approached her later that evening, complimenting her boldness and creativity. An editor from a major fashion magazine pulled her aside, asking thoughtful questions about her process and inspiration. These small interactions gave her hope, even as the larger crowd continued to mock her. As the night wore on, she found herself reflecting on why she was there in the first place. The Met Gala wasn't just about showing off fancy clothes, it was about sparking conversations, challenging norms, and pushing boundaries. Her gown may not have been what people expected, but it was exactly what she intended: a statement about innovation, inclusivity, and sustainability. She reminded herself that art has always been polarizing, that true creativity often makes people uncomfortable before it inspires them. Still, the weight of the criticism was heavy. Backstage, away from the cameras and the crowds, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She sat quietly, taking deep breaths and reminding herself why she started this journey in the first place. She thought about her mother, who worked tirelessly to provide for their family, teaching her the value of resourcefulness along the way. She thought about the countless hours she spent perfecting her craft, determined to prove that sustainability could be luxurious. And she thought about the young designers watching her tonight, hoping to see someone like them succeed. By the time she returned to the main event, she felt grounded again. She walked through the halls of the gala with renewed purpose, smiling warmly at those who dared to meet her gaze. Some guests avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their earlier comments, while others nodded respectfully, acknowledging her resilience. She didn't need validation from anyone, not really. She knew the truth behind her work, and that was enough. As the evening came to a close, she left the venue surrounded by conflicting emotions. On one hand, she felt proud of herself for staying true to her vision, even when the world seemed determined to tear her down. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the sting of rejection, the feeling of being misunderstood. But deep down, she believed that change takes time. People weren't ready to embrace her message yet, but someday, they would be. Little did she know, the tide was already beginning to turn. While most of the world laughed at her gown that night, a handful of influential voices were starting to take notice. Behind the scenes, editors, designers, and activists were having conversations about her work, recognizing its brilliance and bravery. What started as ridicule would soon evolve into respect, and eventually, redemption. 2 days after the Met Gala, something unexpected happened, something that would change everything. While most people had moved on from the jokes and memes, a video clip from one of her interviews started making rounds online. In the clip, she stood confidently in front of reporters, answering their questions with grace and clarity. When asked why she chose such an unconventional design, she didn't hesitate. She explained how every piece of her gown was carefully selected, repurposed, and stitched together to tell a story about sustainability and creativity. The interviewer pressed her further, asking if she felt hurt by the backlash. Her response stopped people in their tracks. "I knew there would be criticism," she said calmly. "But I also knew my work wasn't just for today. It's for tomorrow. If my gown makes even one person think differently about waste or fashion, then it's worth it." Her words resonated deeply with viewers. The video quickly went viral, racking up millions of views within hours. People who had laughed at her dress just days before were now watching her speak with admiration. They listened as she talked about the painstaking process of sourcing materials, the late nights spent sewing tiny details, and the message she hoped to send through her art. For many, it was the first time they truly understood what her gown represented, not trash but transformation. As the video spread, so did the conversation. Influencers who had initially mocked her began issuing apologies, admitting they hadn't taken the time to appreciate her work. One popular fashion blogger wrote a lengthy post titled "Why We Got It Wrong," acknowledging that her gown was far more than a random collection of scraps. It was a masterpiece born out of innovation and purpose. Another prominent designer tweeted, "We missed the point. This is the future of fashion." Even major media outlets started picking up the story. Headlines like "The Gown That Changed Everything" and "Why Everyone Owes Her an Apology" dominated news feeds. Journalists dug deeper into her background, uncovering her journey from a small neighborhood boutique to the global stage of the Met Gala. They highlighted her commitment to sustainability, her resourcefulness, and her determination to challenge the norms of an industry often criticized for its excess. Public opinion shifted dramatically. What started as ridicule turned into respect, and eventually, awe. Social media lit up with hashtags like respect her vision and sustainable style as people rallied around her message. Environmental activists praised her for using her platform to spotlight critical issues like waste and overconsumption. Young designers, especially women of color, thanked her for breaking barriers and proving that innovation could come from anywhere. Fashion insiders weren't far behind in recognizing her brilliance. A well-known editor from a top magazine reached out personally, inviting her to collaborate on a feature about sustainable fashion. Several luxury brands approached her, eager to partner with someone whose vision aligned with their growing focus on ethical practices. Even critics who had dismissed her earlier admitted they'd underestimated her talent and apologized publicly for doing so. One particularly powerful moment came during a panel discussion hosted by a major fashion council. As industry leaders debated the future of fashion, one speaker brought up her name. "She reminded us of something essential," he said. "Fashion isn't just about looking good, it's about doing good. It's about responsibility to our planet, to our communities, and to the generations coming after us." The room erupted in applause, signaling a turning point not just for her but for the entire industry. Amid all the newfound attention, she remained grounded. She gave interviews graciously, always steering the conversation back to her mission. "This isn't about me," she emphasized repeatedly. "It's about changing the way we think about fashion. We can't keep creating at the expense of our planet. There has to be another way." Her humility only added to her appeal. People admired not just her creativity but also her character. She became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that staying true to yourself even when the world pushes back can lead to incredible things. By the end of the week, her gown had gone from being ridiculed to being celebrated. Museums reached out, asking to display her work as part of exhibits on sustainable design. Schools incorporated her story into their curriculums, teaching students about the importance of innovation and inclusivity in art. Even celebrities who had ignored her at the gala started wearing pieces from her collection, showing their support in a very public way. Looking back, it was clear that the night of the Met Gala had been a turning point, not just for her career, but for the fashion world as a whole. What started as mockery transformed into a movement. People realized that her gown wasn't just clothing, it was a call to action, and while the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, she had ignited a spark that couldn't be extinguished. For her, this moment was bigger than any award or accolade. It was proof that authenticity and courage could cut through cynicism and inspire real change. She knew the journey wasn't over, there was still much work to be done, but she also knew that she had already made history, and deep down, she believed that this was only the beginning. Months after the Met Gala, life had changed in ways she never imagined. What started as ridicule turned into recognition, and not just any kind of recognition, but the kind that leaves a lasting mark. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from people eager to work with her or simply thank her for inspiring them. Brands that once ignored her now reached out, offering collaborations and partnerships. Museums wanted to display her work, schools invited her to speak, and magazines clamored to feature her story on their covers. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. One of the most rewarding moments came when she received an invitation to attend awards season, a time when the fashion world celebrates its brightest stars. She didn't expect much, figuring she'd be lucky to even get nominated. But as the ceremony unfolded, her name kept popping up. First, she won Designer of the Year, beating out some of the biggest names in the industry. Then came another award for innovation in fashion, followed by yet another for sustainability leadership. Each win felt surreal, like watching someone else's life play out on stage. When she stepped up to accept her first trophy, the room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed as she stood there, holding the golden statue, overwhelmed with emotion. For a moment, she couldn't find the words. All those years of struggle, all the rejections and doubts rushed back to her. But then she remembered why she was there. Not for herself, but for everyone who believed in her vision. "I want to dedicate this award to anyone who has ever been told they don't belong," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "To the dreamers, the creators, the ones who are told their ideas are too different, too unconventional, too risky, keep going, keep creating. Because the world is ready for change, even if it doesn't realize it yet." Her speech struck a chord. People wiped tears from their eyes, nodding along as she spoke. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted longer than anyone expected. It wasn't just about her talent anymore. It was about what she represented. Resilience, innovation, and hope. The accolades kept coming, but the real reward was seeing how her work inspired others. Young designers, especially women of color, flooded her inbox with messages of gratitude. "You showed me I can make it," one wrote. "I've always loved fashion, but I never thought someone like me could succeed. Now I know anything is possible." Another shared how her story encouraged them to pursue sustainable design, proving that art and activism could go hand in hand. Schools began incorporating her journey into their lessons, teaching students about creativity, resourcefulness, and inclusivity. One teacher sent her photos of a classroom project where kids designed outfits using recycled materials, inspired by her gown. "Thank you for showing us that fashion isn't just about clothes, it's about making a difference," the teacher wrote. Seeing those pictures brought tears to her eyes. This was bigger than awards or fame. This was impact. Even outside the fashion world, her influence grew. Environmental activists praised her for shining a light on sustainability at such a high-profile event. Politicians referenced her work during speeches about climate action, urging industries to adopt greener practices. Documentaries featured her story, highlighting her role in sparking a movement toward ethical fashion. Suddenly, she wasn't just a designer. She was a trailblazer, a symbol of change. Despite all the attention, she stayed grounded. Fame could easily have gone to her head, but she remained the same person she'd always been, humble, hardworking, and deeply connected to her roots. She visited her old neighborhood often, spending time with the community that shaped her. Local kids looked up to her, calling her the lady who made garbage look cool. She laughed every time they said it, knowing exactly what they meant. She also used her platform to give back. A portion of her earnings went toward funding scholarships for underprivileged students interested in design. She partnered with organizations focused on environmental conservation, donating resources and raising awareness. And she continued to create, releasing collections that pushed boundaries while staying true to her values. Every piece told a story, whether it was about resilience, heritage, or hope for the future. As the months passed, the fashion industry itself began to shift. More brands embraced sustainability, launching eco-friendly lines and adopting ethical practices. Magazines dedicated entire issues to green fashion, featuring her work prominently. Even events like the Met Gala started prioritizing themes that encouraged innovation and responsibility. It was clear that her gown had sparked something much bigger than anyone anticipated, a revolution in how people thought about style, waste, and purpose. But perhaps the most fulfilling part of it all was the personal connections she made along the way. Strangers became friends, colleagues became collaborators, and critics became supporters. At one event, a famous designer approached her, apologizing for dismissing her work in the past. "You taught me to see things differently," he admitted. "Thank you for challenging us to do better." Moments like these reminded her that growth often starts with discomfort, and that change is possible when people are willing to listen. Looking back, she realized how far she'd come since that night at the Met Gala. The ridicule, the doubt, the loneliness, it all seemed worth it now. Not because she proved her critics wrong, but because she stayed true to herself. She knew that success wasn't about avoiding criticism. It was about facing it head-on and letting your work speak for itself. And hers did, loudly and beautifully. By the end of the year, her face was everywhere. Billboards, magazine covers, TV interviews, yet none of it fazed her. She still woke up early, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat down at her sewing machine just like she always had. The only difference was that now she had the world's attention, and she planned to use it wisely. Her journey wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. But as she stitched together fabric scraps late at night, she smiled, knowing she'd already left an indelible mark. She had shown the world that true royalty isn't about diamonds or designer labels. It's about courage, creativity, and the power to inspire change. Years passed, but the impact of that one night at the Met Gala continued to ripple through the world. What started as a single moment of ridicule transformed into a legacy, a movement that reshaped an entire industry and inspired countless lives. Her journey didn't just change her own life. It changed the way people thought about fashion, creativity, and what it means to leave a mark on the world. Sustainable fashion wasn't just a niche trend anymore. It became mainstream. Big brands that once dismissed eco-friendly practices scrambled to catch up, launching collections made from recycled materials and adopting ethical production methods. Designers who had laughed at her gown now studied her work, learning how to blend luxury with responsibility. Even fast fashion giants, notorious for their wastefulness, faced pressure to rethink their approach. It was clear she had sparked something irreversible. Schools and universities revamped their curriculums, placing greater emphasis on sustainability and innovation in design. Students no longer saw discarded fabrics as trash. They saw potential. Teachers often told stories about her rise to fame, using her example to encourage young creators to stay true to their vision, even when others doubted them. Remember, they'd say, one person can start a revolution. Her influence stretched beyond fashion, too. Environmental activists credited her with bringing attention to issues like textile waste and overconsumption. Politicians referenced her story during debates about climate policy, urging industries to adopt greener practices. Documentaries featured interviews with her, highlighting her role in inspiring a cultural shift. She became more than a designer. She became a symbol of hope, proof that art could drive meaningful change. Despite all the accolades and recognition, she stayed remarkably humble. Fame hadn't changed her. She still lived simply, spending most of her time in her studio surrounded by fabric scraps and sketches. Her mornings began the same way they always had: a cup of coffee, some quiet reflection, and hours spent sewing. People often asked her how she managed to stay grounded despite everything. "It's simple," she'd reply with a smile. "I'm just doing what I love. The rest is extra." She also made it a point to give back. A portion of every sale went toward funding scholarships for aspiring designers, especially those from underprivileged backgrounds. She partnered with organizations working to reduce environmental harm, donating both money and resources. And she traveled extensively, speaking at events and meeting young creators who looked up to her. Everywhere she went, she left behind a trail of inspiration. One of her favorite moments came years later when she returned to the Met Gala, not as an attendee, but as a guest of honor. This time the theme was a new era of creativity, and her gown from that fateful night was displayed front and center in the exhibit. Visitors stood in awe, reading plaques that explained the painstaking process behind its creation. Many took photos, marveling at how something so unconventional had become iconic. During her speech at the gala, she reflected on how far things had come. "When I walked these steps years ago, I never imagined this would happen," she said, looking out at the crowd. "I didn't know if anyone would understand my message or care, but you did. You listened, and together we started something bigger than any of us." The room erupted in applause, but she quickly shifted the focus away from herself. "This isn't my victory," she continued. "It belongs to everyone who believes in a better future, for fashion, for our planet, and for each other. Let's keep pushing boundaries, asking questions, and challenging the status quo. Because the best is yet to come." Her words resonated deeply, leaving many in tears. Afterward, guests lined up to thank her, sharing how her story had impacted their lives. One young woman, barely in her 20s, told her she'd decided to pursue sustainable design after seeing her gown go viral. "You showed me it's okay to be different," she said. Now I want to do the same for someone else. That night, as she walked through the halls of the Met, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She wasn't just a designer anymore. She was a mentor, a leader, a catalyst for change. But more than anything, she was human. She remembered the struggles, the sleepless nights, the moments when self-doubt crept in. Those experiences shaped her, reminding her to stay connected to the people around her. In the years that followed, her contributions earned her a permanent place in history. Museums dedicated exhibits to her work, showcasing not just her designs, but the philosophy behind them. Books were written about her journey, analyzing how a single gown could ignite such a powerful movement. Award ceremonies honored her repeatedly, though she always insisted the real winners were the ones carrying her message forward. Looking back, she realized the key to her success wasn't talent or luck. It was resilience. She'd faced rejection, criticism, and doubt, but she refused to let them define her. Instead, she used them as fuel, proving that authenticity and courage could overcome even the harshest storms. Her story reminded people that greatness isn't about perfection. It's about perseverance. And while the world celebrated her achievements, she remained focused on the future. There was still so much work to be done. Climate change loomed large, and the fashion industry had only scratched the surface of sustainability. Young creators needed guidance, resources, and opportunities. Communities needed voices willing to stand up and demand change. She knew her journey wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who dared to dream of a better tomorrow. On quiet evenings, she'd sit in her studio, surrounded by half-finished projects and scraps waiting to be transformed. She'd think about where it all began, the little girl watching her mother sew scraps into treasures, the young woman stitching together her first designs, the designer walking into the Met Gala knowing she might face ridicule. Each step had led her here, to this moment where she could look back and see the difference she'd made, but she also knew the work wasn't done. As long as there were problems to solve and dreams to chase, she'd keep creating. Because that's what she loved most. Not the fame or the awards, but the act of making something beautiful out of nothing. Something that told a story, sparked a conversation, or changed a life. Her legacy wasn't just in the gowns she designed or the movements she inspired. It was in the hearts of everyone who believed in second chances, in scraps turned into masterpieces, in ideas dismissed but proven right, in dreams deferred but never abandoned. She reminded the world that true royalty isn't about wealth or titles. It's about courage, creativity, and the power to inspire others. And as she picked up her needle and thread, ready to begin another project, she smiled. The best part? Her story wasn't over yet.